The year was 1944, and the English countryside trembled with the sound of roaring Merlin engines. The air was thick with mist, and the metallic scent of aviation fuel. Rows of silver P-51 Mustangs sat glistening under the pale sunrise at RAF Bodney Airfield. Every morning, young men climbed into machines that turned them into legends or left them as vapor trails fading into nothing. Among them was Captain Jack Reynolds. 27 years old, 6 feet tall, lean, restless, and carved by the kind of determination that only war could forge. His flight suit was stained with grease, his gloves torn at the fingertips, his eyes sharper than the steel of his aircraft. Jack was the squadron's quiet rebel, a man who looked at the sky not as an enemy, but as a puzzle that could be solved. His squadron mates called him the Dreamer. They joked about how he stayed in the hangar long after everyone else had gone to the mess hall, scribbling equations on oil drums and tracing airflow patterns with chalk on the concrete floor. To them, Jack was obsessed with something that did not matter. But to him, every turn, every movement, every vibration of the plane was a code waiting to be cracked. He hated losing, especially when German fighters cut inside his turns. He would push his Mustang to its limits, yet those Messerschmitts always seemed to turn tighter, closer, deadlier. Each time he landed, his knuckles were white from gripping the control stick, and his jaw locked in silent fury. There had to be a way to make the Mustang turn sharper. There had to be a secret buried inside the mechanics of flight that no one had dared to touch. One evening, while others played cards and laughed about their near-death escapes, Jack stayed behind. The sun dipped low, the hangar filled with a warm, amber glow. He crouched near the tail of his Mustang, adjusting the rudder cables with a small wrench. A broken mirror, salvaged from a wrecked Spitfire, leaned against a toolbox. When the light hit it just right, it reflected the faint shimmer of the rudder surface, moving in ways he had never noticed before. Jack froze. He tilted the mirror slightly. The reflection revealed a subtle twist, a delayed reaction between the rudder and the airflow when the plane banked. His heart began to race. It was something no manual mentioned, something pilots were trained to ignore. But Jack saw potential in that imperfection. What if he could use that delay, not fight it? What if the rudder, used in the exact wrong way, could pull the aircraft tighter instead of slipping it wide? He grabbed a notebook and began sketching. Chalk dust covered his hands as he calculated angles, airflow vectors, and force balance. His mind raced faster than the Mustang itself. Outside, the engines of other planes echoed like thunder across the field, but Jack barely heard them. He was lost in a trance. A mechanic walked by, smirking. "You planning to fly to the moon, Captain?" he said. Jack did not look up. "No," he replied quietly. "Just planning to turn faster than death." That night, as the rest of the base fell silent, Jack sat alone under the faint hum of a single lamp, the mirror beside him reflecting the glint of determination in his eyes. In that moment, he did not know it, but he was about to change the way fighter pilots turned forever. The next morning, the fog hung low over the airfield like a curtain of ghosts that refused to leave. The ground crews moved silently, their boots pressing into the damp soil as if even the earth understood the weight of the war. Inside Hangar 3, Captain Jack Reynolds stood beside his P-51 Mustang, his eyes fixed on the tail assembly as if he were staring into the future. The mirror he had used the night before now sat propped against a stack of ammunition crates, reflecting the faint orange glow of sunrise across the polished aluminum skin of the aircraft. The others thought he was losing his mind. A pilot was supposed to sleep, to rest, to prepare for the next mission. But Jack was consumed. He had spent half the night whispering to himself, testing theories in the empty air. The strange reflection in that cracked mirror had shown him something hidden, a flaw in design that could become a weapon if he understood it deeply enough. He studied the angle of the rudder, the way the air wrapped around the tail, and how the Mustang's nose reacted when pressure shifted from one wing to another. Every inch of the aircraft seemed alive to him, breathing, responding, whispering secrets in the language of aerodynamics. A mechanic named Turner walked in, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He had worked with Jack long enough to know when the captain was chasing an idea. "You really think twisting that rudder a few degrees will make a difference?" he asked, half amused, half worried. Jack looked up, his expression unreadable. "Not twisting, timing. The rudder is late when the air bites. If I can make it move first instead of last, I can pull the turn tighter." "It is not about power. It is about anticipation," Turner frowned. "Or you will spin out of the sky," Jack smiled faintly. "Then I will learn what the edge feels like." The mechanic walked away shaking his head, muttering about pilots and their insanity. But Jack could not stop. He adjusted the control cables again, then climbed into the cockpit, pressing the rudder pedals with calculated precision. He watched the mirror, seeing how even the smallest movement changed the reflection of the tail. The pattern was mesmerizing. The way light curved across the metal matched the rhythm of his thoughts. For every risk, there was a gain. For every degree of danger, there was a sliver of mastery. Outside, engines began to roar as squadrons prepared for another sortie over France. The sound echoed through the hangar, but Jack remained still, absorbed in the mirror's reflection. The war outside could wait. Inside this hangar, he was fighting a different kind of battle, one between intuition and control, between instinct and fear. He could feel that something extraordinary was hidden, just one discovery away. He picked up a pencil and drew on the side of an old fuel drum. Arrows, lines, pressure flow paths. He was mapping the invisible. The mirror caught the sunlight again, bouncing it across his face, and for a moment it felt like fate itself was shining a light on the solution he sought. That evening, a shadow stretched long across the airfield. Jack sat on the wing of his Mustang, staring at the horizon. The sky burned orange, and the air smelled of oil, smoke, and rain. He could hear laughter in the distance, the voices of men pretending the war would end tomorrow. But Jack stayed silent. The idea inside his mind had become a fire that refused to go out. He whispered to himself, "If I can feel the slip before it happens, I can beat it." The words disappeared into the wind, but the determination stayed. Somewhere deep down, he knew that this crazy mirror revelation would either make him a genius or a ghost. And in war, sometimes those two things were the same. Dawn broke cold and silver over the English countryside, the kind of morning that carried both silence and tension in the air. The fog rolled like smoke across the runway, and the metallic scent of fuel mixed with the faint sweetness of wet grass. Captain Jack Reynolds stood alone beside his P-51 Mustang. The mirror from the hangar now strapped inside the cockpit with a strip of cloth torn from an old parachute. His heart pounded with a rhythm that matched the slow hum of the Merlin engine warming up. Today was the day he would test his theory. No one knew. No one was supposed to. He had waited for this moment for weeks. Every calculation, every sleepless night spent sketching airflow diagrams on the hangar walls had led to this exact second. The squadron was still at breakfast, and the control tower had not yet started calling flight orders. The field was his alone. The rising sun burned through the mist, and for the first time in months, Jack felt a strange calmness settle inside him. He was not nervous. He was curious. He climbed into the cockpit, pulled the canopy shut, and ran his gloved fingers across the worn control stick. The mirror glinted faintly beside the rudder pedal, angled just enough for him to see how the tail moved when the rudder kicked in. The mechanic Turner had warned him not to do it. "It will flip you upside down before you know it," he had said. But Jack had smiled then and simply replied, "That is the point." The propeller blurred into motion. The Mustang began to roll forward, the wheels slicing through the fog as the ground disappeared beneath him. As soon as he was airborne, the world transformed. The air was alive, vibrating with possibility. Jack leveled out at 5,000 feet, the mirror catching the sunlight that danced across the cockpit. His mind replayed the equations, the split-second timing he needed to execute perfectly. He banked left, gently at first. The Mustang responded smoothly, obediently, like every other time before. Then he tried it, the move that could change everything. As he rolled the aircraft left, he pressed the rudder the opposite way, just for a fraction of a heartbeat. The plane jolted violently, his body slammed against the harness, and the warning horn blared. The Mustang shuddered on the edge of a stall. But then something happened. The air bit differently. The wing caught earlier. The nose swung faster. The aircraft pivoted in the sky like a predator turning on its prey. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The mirror shimmered with the reflection of sunlight and motion. He had done it. The Mustang was no longer fighting physics. It was bending it. He tried again, this time harder. The same result. The aircraft turned sharper, tighter, and faster than it ever had before. The G-forces pulled at his body, but he laughed through the pressure. The roar of the engine filled his ears, and his mind flooded with disbelief. Every other pilot thought that the rudder was only for correction, for control. None of them had ever used it like this, to attack the air itself. Down below, the airfield staff stared at the strange display of maneuvers cutting through the morning haze. Turner watched from the hangar doorway, his cigarette frozen between his fingers. The Mustang was spinning, snapping, and twisting in ways it should not have been able to, yet somehow it stayed in the air. Inside the cockpit, Jack shouted over the roar, "Tripled! It has tripled!" He could feel it. 3 times the turn rate, 3 times the control, 3 times the danger. His vision blurred from the G-forces, but he refused to ease up. He wanted to understand it completely, to feel the limits of his discovery. When he finally landed, the runway shimmered in the morning light, and his hands trembled on the throttle. The mechanics rushed toward him, expecting to find a broken machine, but the Mustang stood untouched, purring softly, like a satisfied beast. Jack stepped out, eyes wide, face pale, heart still racing. He looked at Turner and said in a quiet, almost disbelieving voice, "It works." The mechanic stared back at him. "You are insane, Captain," Jack smiled faintly. "Maybe, but today insanity just rewrote the laws of flight." And somewhere deep in the fog, history quietly shifted its course. The sky over northern France was a canvas of chaos and fire. Smoke curled from distant villages, and the sound of distant artillery rumbled through the clouds like a warning that the war was far from over. Captain Jack Reynolds climbed into his P-51 Mustang, the weight of the mission pressing against his chest like the G-forces he would soon face. Today he would see if his rudder trick could survive the ultimate test, combat. There were no experiments in the quiet air of the training field. Here, every second was life or death. Jack ran his hands over the cockpit controls, feeling the familiar grooves worn into the metal by countless flights. The mirror beside the rudder pedal reflected the early morning sunlight, catching his determined gaze. Every calculation he had made, every sleepless night of studying airflow and angles, had led to this moment. He could feel the anticipation vibrating through his veins, mingling with the adrenaline that would only intensify once he took off. The Mustang roared to life, and the engine's growl echoed across the airfield. He taxied down the runway, the tires slicing through the frost-laden tarmac. As he lifted into the sky, clouds rushed past like ghosts, carrying with them the weight of history and expectation. He leveled at 10,000 feet, scanning the horizon for enemy aircraft, his mind racing through the timing of the rudder maneuver. He could feel the air currents before they touched the wings, a skill sharpened by days of silent observation and endless practice. Suddenly, 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s appeared, diving from the sun with lethal precision. Jack's heart tightened, but he did not panic. Instead, he recalled every detail of the rudder experiment. This was the moment when theory met reality, when calculation met instinct. He banked sharply to the left, pressing the rudder against the roll in the exact sequence he had practiced. The Mustang twisted violently, almost beyond the limits of its frame, yet it held. The German fighters overshot. Their eyes widened in confusion as the Mustang pivoted around them, like a predator, anticipating every movement. Jack's finger found the trigger, and the 50 caliber guns spoke in bursts of fire. The lead enemy aircraft shuddered under the impact and spiraled downwards. His heart pounded, not just from the G-forces, but from the thrill of seeing his discovery working under the most extreme conditions. His wingman, struggling to keep up, shouted over the radio, "Jack, what in the world did you just do?" Jack's voice came steady, filled with triumphant focus. "It is the rudder. The timing, not the power. Watch closely." He executed another turn, faster and tighter, than anything conventional wisdom allowed. The Mustang danced in the sky, a defiance of expectation, and every enemy plane that tried to follow fell behind. Below, the landscape raced by, forests and rivers blurred by speed. The adrenaline surged, sharpening every sense. Jack could see every movement of the enemy, predict every maneuver, and control his aircraft as if it were an extension of his own body. His mind was in a state of absolute focus, fully aware yet free, calculating angles, anticipating airflow, feeling every vibration through the rudder and control stick. By the time the dogfight ended, the enemy aircraft had fled, confused and outmaneuvered. Jack returned to the airfield, hands shaking from exertion, body humming with exhilaration. Mechanics and fellow pilots crowded around, staring at the Mustang as though it had sprouted wings of fire. Turner approached, awe written across his face. "You did the impossible, Captain," he said. Jack removed his helmet, sweat streaking his face, and looked at the mirror strapped beside the rudder pedal. "It is not impossible," he said softly. "It is just timing. The air speaks, and if you listen, you can make it obey." That day, in the chaos of battle, a simple trick became legend. A discovery born in a quiet hangar had proven itself against the most lethal opponents in the sky. And somewhere in the clouds, history noted a small change that would ripple through every mission, every pilot, every dogfight that followed. The Mustang was no longer just a plane. It had become a weapon guided by the mind of a man who refused to accept limits. The war had moved on, but the memory of the skies over northern France remained etched in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Captain Jack Reynolds walked slowly across the quiet airfield, the early morning sun glinting off the silver wings of his P-51 Mustang. The air smelled of oil, wet earth, and something faintly sweet, the scent of history in motion. He ran his gloved hand along the fuselage, feeling the metal warmth beneath his fingers, remembering the countless turns, dives, and maneuvers that had tested both the limits of the aircraft and his own body. Each scratch and dent told a story, but none told the story of the moment he had discovered the rudder trick that changed everything. He thought back to the first time he had seen the reflection in the cracked mirror, how it had revealed a secret hidden in plain sight. That moment had been quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it had ignited a fire in him that refused to be extinguished. Every night afterward he had studied, calculated, and visualized the impossible. The war raged around him, but in those hours of study and silent focus, he had controlled something far greater than the enemy. It was the air itself that obeyed him, bending to his understanding, revealing its secrets to a man who refused to accept limits. Now, years later, the war was behind him, but the lesson remained. Mastery was not merely about speed or power. It was about observation, anticipation, and courage to act when others hesitated. Jack had returned from countless missions, each one a test of skill and nerve, each one validating the small, insane idea that had begun in a dimly lit hangar. His fellow pilots had laughed, the mechanics had doubted, but history had proven him right. The rudder trick was no longer a secret. It had become a part of the legacy of aerial combat, a technique studied by instructors, copied and perfected, yet always carrying the mark of the man who had discovered it first. He paused at the edge of the runway, watching younger pilots taxiing their aircraft, oblivious to the countless battles that had been fought in the skies above. Their faces were bright with anticipation, their eyes filled with hope and fear, the same mixture he had felt decades ago. He imagined them performing maneuvers, imagining the impossible, discovering secrets hidden in the movement of their machines. He smiled faintly, knowing that in some way, a piece of him lived on in each of them, in every sharp turn, every daring dive, every moment when instinct met innovation. Jack climbed once more into the cockpit of the Mustang, feeling the familiar weight of the controls beneath his hands. The engine roared to life, steady and confident, as if recognizing the man who had tamed it. He taxied to the runway, lifted into the air, and executed a perfect roll, a demonstration of the precision and daring that had defined his career. The clouds embraced him, wrapping around the wings, shifting and dancing in response to every subtle input. He was alone, yet connected to the memory of every pilot, every mission, every dogfight that had come before and would come after. As he glided back to the field, landing smoothly, he realized something profound. History was not made by machines, nor by orders from distant generals. History was made by those who dared to see differently, who listened when others ignored, who acted when others hesitated. He stepped out, the sun warm on his face, the air calm, and for a moment the war, the danger, the adrenaline, all faded into the quiet triumph of discovery. Jack Reynolds had risked everything for a simple insight, a small observation in a cracked mirror, and in doing so, he had altered the course of aerial combat forever. And somewhere in the echoes of the sky, and the subtle shift of air currents, and the faint whisper of the wind across silver wings, his triumph endured, timeless, untouchable, and unforgotten.